Our scripture reading today is Genesis chapter 6, verses 9 through 14 and verses 17 to 22. This is the account of Noah and his family. Noah was a righteous man, blameless among the people of his time, and he walked faithfully with God. Noah had 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Now the earth was corrupt in God's sight and was full of violence. God saw how corrupt the earth had become, for all the people on earth had corrupted their ways. So God said to Noah, I'm going to put an end to all people, for the earth is filled with violence because of them. I am surely going to destroy both them and the earth. So make yourself an ark of cypress wood. Make rooms in it and coat it with pitch inside and out. I'm going to bring flood waters on the earth to destroy all life under the heavens. Every creature that has the breath of life in it, everything on earth will perish. But I will establish my covenant with you, and you will enter the ark, you and your sons and your wife and your sons' wives with you. You are to bring into the ark two of all living creatures, male and female, to keep them alive with you. 2 of every kind of bird, of every kind of animal, of every kind of creature that moves along the ground will come to you to be kept alive. You are to take every kind of food that is to be eaten and store it away as food for you and for them. Noah did everything just as God commanded him. The story of the flood. The story of the flood is one of those stories, if you grow up in the church, you learn at a very young age. But you learn a kidified version of the story of the flood at a young age, as you should, because the story itself has some pretty traumatic kinds of things in it. Today we're going to move past the kidified version and get into some of the deeper level things in this story that we find in Genesis chapter 6 through 8. 3 chapters actually 3.5 really, devoted to the story of the flood. And I'm gonna I didn't want to read the whole thing. That would have just been painful for everybody. But I want to kind of retell some more of that story than I've just read. We've read the part. The world was corrupt. God said that their violence had filled the earth because of the people that were in the world, and God was going to destroy all living things that breathed and walked upon the earth and the birds of the air. Fish were doing all right in this, but if you lived on dry ground, you were in trouble. You were going to die unless you were in the ark. And so the kidified version, we know the animals came 2 by 2, a male and female of every animal. What we often forget is that right after the verses we just read, God told Noah to not only do you bring 2 of every kind of animal, but of the clean animals you bring 7 pairs, a male and female of each of the clean animals. It's an interesting thing for God to say to Noah, because at this point in the scripture, we're not told of any difference between clean and unclean animals. That we didn't get those kinds of instructions till God gave them to Moses later on. But apparently Noah knew what God was talking about, and there was a reason for that. And we'll get to that reason a little bit later. But all of the animals then came, and God brought all of the animals. They all got on the ark. God told Noah, bring all the food that is fit for the animals to eat. Bring that on the ark as well. Then God sent Noah and his wife and his sons and their wives into the ark, and God sealed up the door. And I think there's probably more than one way to read this, but I think you read it. They were on the ark for 7 days before the water came. Would have liked to have heard some of those discussions. Noah's wife. Noah, what? A boat in the middle of nowhere? You tell us we've been in here 6 days. There's not a drop of water, Noah. What's going on? Dad, Noah, come on, Dad. What do you tell us to do this? Don't know exactly what happened, but they were in there until the water came. When the water came, it came. Bible says God opened up the floodgates of the heavens, and water poured down from the heavens. And God opened up the floodgates of the earth, and water gushed up from the depths of the earth. And soon that giant boat that was sitting out there in the middle of nowhere was floating on a vast ocean. And the waters came for 40 days and for 40 nights. And everyone and everything that they had ever known was destroyed. All of it. Every human being outside of that boat, every friend they had ever made, every friend they'd ever had, every extended family member, all gone. All gone, wiped out. in this torrential, destructive flood. Every place, every house they had ever lived in or ever visited, every place where they'd ever broken bread, every place where they'd ever danced or laughed or played or learned or sung, it was all gone. It was all wiped out in a matter of days, a matter of hours. 40 days and 40 nights, the waters came. It's interesting. This is one of those stories, again, where you can talk about, are we supposed to take this literally? Did this literally happen? And the story of the great flood is kind of poo-pooed outside the church, and it's one of those things, as Rick was mentioning, if you kind of say you believe in the story of the flood, then some folks just think you're a wacko. Here's an interesting thing, though. This doesn't prove or disprove the flood. But in every continent of the earth, Asia, Europe, Africa, North America, South America, Australia, and the Pacific Islands. I'm going to leave out Antarctica because there's just penguins down there. Every continent has indigenous groups that have a story of a great destructive flood. And many of those say that the flood came because God was angry at the corruption of the people. Every continent of the earth, that story is told. From indigenous groups. The story was there before the Christians got there and before the Jewish folks got there. That doesn't prove that the story of the flood is true, but you got to wonder why everywhere on the earth there's a story of a flood if there was never a flood. Just going to throw that out there. But archaeology and literalism aside, this story has 40 days and 40 nights the rains came until the waters covered even the highest mountains. And then the rain stopped. The rain stopped. And I believe it was after 150 days, there was a big thud and the ark hit land. The top of Mount Ararat. We have some ideas about maybe where Mount Ararat is. Is it the same as modern day Mount Ararat? Maybe, maybe not. We don't know for sure, but they hit a mountain that they called Ararat and they stuck there. But there was still just water everywhere. They stayed on the ark for, 150 days after the water stopped. And then more than 200 days after they hit land. At some point, Noah opened up the window. He sent out the raven. The raven never came back. I got to think in the ancient cultures and with this story was originally told, that was a joke. I can't figure out what the joke is, but he sent out the raven. The raven was like, I'm done. I'm not coming back. I don't know whether the raven was upset about the other raven that he'd been chosen to spend, was the only other raven he was ever going to know, and he didn't like that raven. I don't know. I don't know whether he didn't like the smells. I don't know whether he didn't like the people, but he's like, I'm out of here. I'm not coming back. The raven never came back. Then God sent out a dove, and the dove came back. And then Noah sent out another dove. They sent out the dove again, and the dove came back with an olive branch in its mouth. And then Noah sent out the dove a third time, and the dove never came back. And God opened up the doors of the ark and told Noah and his family, time to go. And they went out. And God made a covenant with the people, Noah and his family. He said, I will never do this again. Never again, God says. It's very interesting. It's phrased two different ways. One's in one chapter. We'll get to the second one next week. We'll talk a little bit more about life right after the flood next week. But the first time God said it, God simply said, I will never again destroy all creatures, all people on earth. Later when God said, I'll never again destroy, he said, I'd never destroy with a flood. But first he said, I'll never do this again. I will never destroy everyone again. This is not going to happen ever again. And he made a covenant. And on his part of the covenant, he put a rainbow in the sky. And he said, so when you see the rainbow, you'll know that I'll never do this again. When I see the rainbow, I'll know I'll never do this again. For Noah's side of the covenant, for the human side, they took those clean animals and they offered blood sacrifices to God for sparing them and sustaining them, through that devastation and destruction. The first thing they did when they got off of the ark was they worshiped. They worshiped. We'll talk a little bit more about that next week. But this is the story of the flood. Whether you think of it as literal or an extended parable, there are lessons that are here. And we could spend hours and hours and hours. I only have 3 lessons for us today. 3 simple lessons from the flood that I think that are good for us to carry in our pockets and have in the back of our minds and written in our hearts as we walk through this life. One of those lessons is that God will not put up with evil forever. God won't. We serve a merciful God. We serve a loving and gracious God. We serve the God who is powerful and good, who by His word brought all that is into being, that gave human beings His very own breath, His very own spirit, His very own life, made us in His image. We serve a God who, when we had gotten off track yet again, God sent His own Son. He came to us in the flesh and died for us on our behalf to make a way for us to be with Him in life that is good and joyful and wonderful forever and ever. We serve a good and merciful and gracious God, and our good and merciful and gracious God will not put up with evil forever. God looked down at the world and said, "This is not what I intended. This is not my plan. When I created the heavens and the earth and put you on here and said, be fruitful and multiply and take charge over all the animals and all of the earth as my stewards, this is not my plan. You have not lived it out. This can't continue." As bad as the earth is now, it wasn't bad as it was then. God said just a few verses earlier that He looked at humanity, and there were at the very, very, very minimum tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands, possibly millions, maybe billions of people on the earth at that time. We don't know for sure, but given the lifespans and the number of years and the abilities of humans to repopulate, it is quite possible, barring death and diseases, that there were billions of people on the earth. And God looked out and said, every thought and inclination of their hearts and minds is always evil all the time. That's as bad as it gets. Everyone, except Noah and his family. And the earth, because of that, was filled with violence and filled with exploitation, and the weak the powerful dominating the weak and lording it over them. And God said, "This is not what I wanted." When we look at our windows, when we look at our phones, we look at our live streams, we look at our social media, look at the news, listen to the radio, whatever we're looking and listening to, there's a lot of evil in this world. There's a lot of violence. There's a lot of the powerful exploiting the weak. There's a lot of the rich exploiting the poor. There's a lot of abuse. There's a lot of death that is complete. People starving to death when we produce enough food in this world to feed everyone every year, and people are starving to death. People dying of treatable illnesses, diseases that we have the treatments and the cures for, and people dying from those. There's all sorts of evil going on in this world. All sorts of evil. And every 4 years, at least in America, we seem to get this sense of, well, if we can just put the right person in office, we can fix all of this. I don't think it matters a whole lot. It matters who's in office, but it doesn't matter in terms of fixing all of the evil that's in the world. If human beings had the capacity to fix the evil in the world, it would have been fixed a long time ago. I don't think we can do it. And sometimes it seems like nothing can be done about it. But the lesson that we have from the book of Genesis, and that's reaffirmed in the book of Revelation, is that God will not put up with evil forever. God will put an end to it one day. And that doesn't make God a mean, angry, petty God. which is a lot of times how people, critics of the church or critics of Christianity, and Judaism will look at these passages and say, well, you just serve a mean, vicious, angry God. Who would ever want to serve a mean, vicious, angry God? No, we serve a God who says that in my kingdom that I have planned that child abuse can't go on forever. That the exploitation of the weak can't go on forever. That abuse of those that are weaker can't go on forever. That all of those various ways that we hurt and destroy and injure and wound other human beings in their bodies, their spirits, and in their souls, God says that cannot go on forever. Out of mercy for the creation, the people that I love, I will not allow those kinds of things to last forever. That's the God that we serve. That's the God that we serve. You see, God wants His world to be a world of love, a world of plenty, a world of compassion, a world of dignity, a world of creativity, and a world of harmony. That's the world God created. That's what Eden was like. And then Adam and Eve screwed it up. I would have screwed it up too. That's not me throwing stones at Adam and Eve. It's just reality. And Cain doubled down on it. And it just got worse and worse and worse, generation after generation after generation. And the world that existed, the culture and the community that existed just before the flood was not what God intended. God created a world in which there was bounty and plenty, enough for everyone to have all that they needed. Where folks could live in harmony and love with each other and with God, where every human being would be treated with dignity as a child of God and a person of worth, where people would be able to exercise their creativity in the development and growth of culture and the world around them, where folks lived in harmony. That's what God intended, and that's what God still intends. And God will not allow evil to persist forever. And He will wipe it out no matter what the cost. God can and will make all the bad things go away forever. That's the God that we serve. Lesson 2, God can and will preserve those who follow His way. God can and will preserve those who follow His way. Here's one guy and his family that God says are living righteously. They're living and following God's way. That way of love and plenty and treating others with dignity and living in harmony with God and with each other. That there was one family that was doing that, and God saved them out of all of that. He provided that ark so that even though everything else in the world was destroyed, those faithful to God would not be. This is the plan and the promise. God can and will preserve those who follow God's way, and God's way, the way of love, the way of plenty, the way of compassion, dignity, creativity, harmony, and humble self-sacrifice. Now, that doesn't mean that those who follow God, those who follow Jesus, will never experience suffering and pain. Anyone who's followed Jesus for any length of time knows that simply isn't true. And Jesus said it. In this world, you will have trouble. In this world, you will have trouble. But what it does mean is that God, no matter what the cost, God will make all bad things end forever. That no matter what the cost, God will make a way for those who are faithful to Him to live forever. And that cost, both sides of that coin were paid on the cross when Jesus lived and suffered and died on the cross and then rose again from the dead. God began the destruction of all that's evil, and God made a way for all that is good and for all those that are faithful to Him to live with Him in this world that God intends it to be forever and ever and ever. God provides that way. And that way is the cross of Christ. The way is for us to humble ourselves, to live lives of humble sacrifice, humbling ourselves before God, receiving the gift of the blood of Jesus Christ for our sin. For we are not sinless any more than Noah was sinless. We'll see some of that in the next couple of weeks. Noah was not perfect. Noah was not perfect. But he was living with compassion, treating others with dignity, creatively working in the world, living in harmony with others, and offering humble self-sacrifice. And that's the life that we're called to through Jesus Christ. Lesson number 3, we have to leave the ark. we have to leave the ark. There was an image of the church. I'm not sure when originally developed. I know it became very popular in the 50s and 60s in the United States for a variety of reasons that I'm not going to get into today. But an image that the church today is the ark. On one hand, that's a beautiful image. Chaos in the world around you, come into the church to be free from the chaos, to be part of a community of love and grace and mercy and compassion, and the church is the ark in a chaotic world. It's a beautiful image. It's fatally flawed. Because the ark existed to preserve people from the chaos that was around them. Jesus created the church to send people, his people, into the chaos that's around them. So the church is not the ark. Our baptism is a reminder of going into the water to die. That everything that is not of God gets destroyed in the water. It dies in the water. When we come back up, now we don't stay in the ark. We have to leave the ark. God had to tell Noah and his family, it's time to get out of the ark. You got to have some compassion for them, though. I mean, everything they knew had been destroyed. And the safety of that space, the haven that ark came for them, the courage it must have taken for them to leave the ark and leave it behind. Depending only on the promise of God that he would never do that again. To go out into the world. This is what God calls us to. To go out, we have to leave the ark. We come into the church, but we come into the church building so that we are better prepared to go out into the chaos of the world to live this life that God has called us to live. To live this life of, go back. This life, this way of love, of plenty, of compassion, of dignity, treating every other human being that we encounter with compassion, of dignity, treating them and seeing them as children of God and people of worth, whether they see that in themselves or not. As much as we're able, living in harmony and peace with others, living lives of humble self-sacrifice, not dominating, exploiting, and stepping on the necks of others to secure the place for ourselves or our own families in the world, but laying down our lives to lift others up. This is what we're sent for. To leave the ark, to not live in the safety and the security of a safe place, but to go out into the world as Christ's ambassadors and share his hope and his life and his way. Because the story isn't really about the flood. It's not really about the flood. I call it, I don't know maybe you call it something different. I call it the story of the flood or the story of Noah's ark. It's not really about Noah and the ark either. The story is about God. Our good and powerful God and his plan for the world. See, it's not about Noah. It's a story to show us who God is and what God is and his plan for the world. And God's plan for the world is that the world will not be a cesspool of violence and pain and suffering and exploitation forever. God's plan is for the world to be clean and beautiful and filled with a people who will live and love and care for one another and the world that God has made. And God will do that no matter what the cost. Now, the fact is, God will never destroy all people again. We're about finished with our Revelation Bible study. Last session is this Wednesday. I was originally planned it to be done in May before Memorial Day. I'm slow. I never finish as quick as I want to. We'll be done this week. And there's so many things in Revelation that reflect the Genesis account. Except this, that in Revelation, God always sets a limit on the destruction. God always sets a limit. No matter how much devastation there is, no matter how much violence there is, no matter how much death there is, God always sets a limit. He sets a limit to the devastation and destruction, and he makes a way and preserves his faithful people. And so never again will everyone be destroyed. But there will be a day when all of the bad things will come to an end. Because that's God's plan. What God plans, God will bring into being. And God's plan for this world is that it be populated and filled with a people who are faithful to Him and to His way, treating each other with love and dignity and respect whenever and wherever we encounter each other. That's the story that we have today, is the lengths that God will go to for His good and perfect plan to be achieved. God remembered Noah and all the wild animals and the livestock that were with him in the ark. God remembered. God prepared them and cared for them and provided for them, and then sent them out into the world. God has remembered us and cared for us and provided for us, and sends us out into the world as well.